Good afternoon and welcome back from the break, everyone. My name is Marcy Birchfield. I lead the board's Economic Blueprint Institute, a strategic initiative that works to enhance collaboration and competitiveness in the Toronto region by leveraging the power of data and insights to achieve integrated economic zone planning. Our data insights draw attention to the patterns and inspire future action. This has been especially important during the pandemic, a period when so many aspects of our lives have been disrupted. Over the past year, our work demonstrated the uneven economic impact of the pandemic across the region, highlighting where our essential workers continued to travel, where businesses suffered from the loss of their customer base, the downtown office worker overnight. You can check out how the board is tracking economic recovery through our recovery tracker. By taking a more data-driven, place-based approach to understanding how people move, for what purpose, and to where, we can begin to make sense out of new patterns that emerge and use those insights to inform policymaking and direct strategic investments. It's exactly the same in transportation. Since it can take years and potentially decades to complete a project, we must make sure we are future-proofing transportation projects as much as possible. This idea materializes around discussions about emissions, automation, about growth across the region, and the integration of services and more. So when we talk about the future of transportation, it's more than a blue sky exercise, imagining what could be possible. Rather, it's about looking at the data today and making smart decisions for tomorrow, part of which includes considering what existing infrastructure can we recycle or maximize its use. Here to take the long look is our final panel of the day. But before we meet them, I draw your attention to the poll we have just made available through our polling features to the right of your screen. On the topic of looking ahead, we're asking you to rank which transportation areas and topics you'd like the board to explore further in future events, be it public transit, climate action, supply chains, or more. Please answer the poll now, and as you do, I'll introduce you to a great partner of the summit, Cyrus Reporter, Canadian National Railways Vice President of Public Government and Regulatory Affairs. Cyrus oversees engagement at all levels of government in both Canada and the United States, and he leads stakeholder and community relations, which are essential components to CN's focus on environmental, social, and governance initiatives. Welcome, Cyrus, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Marcy, for the kind introduction. Hello to everyone attending. We hope that you and your families are remaining safe and healthy in these unprecedented times. Indeed, CN is a very proud, long-standing partner of the Toronto Region Board of Trade, and we're delighted to be sponsoring today's event. We value our strong and lasting relationships with the Toronto Region's business community, and we're proud to contribute to the economic development of all of Ontario. CN is a proud enabler of the North American economy, to our customers and to the communities that we serve. We safely transport more than 300 million tons of natural resources, manufactured products, and finished goods throughout North America every day along our 20,000-mile rail network. Last year alone, we made capital investments of over $350 million in Ontario alone, with a focus on technology, capacity building, and infrastructure maintenance, all to enhance the safety and fluidity of our network. In particular, CN's working very closely with government officials to launch our Milton Logistics Hub. This hub will be an inland terminal that will provide increased network capacity for CN's intermodal business and work in tandem with CN's existing Brampton Intermodal Terminal facility. It'll be a great job creator, and it'll be one of the most advanced and environmentally friendly intermodal terminals of its kind in North America. At CN, we believe the future of transportation resides in strategic infrastructure and investments, innovation and technology, and reliable and efficient customer service. We're also committed to the highest environment, social, and governance standards, delivering responsibly to build a sustainable future, moving our customer goods safely and efficiently. You may have seen that we are proud to welcome a new president and CEO, Tracy Robinson, at the end of the month, who will take on her leadership responsibilities at CN. And I know she will be keen to continue the proud tradition we have of working closely with the Toronto Region Board of Trade to grow economic opportunities for all of those who live in the Toronto region. Thank you again, and best wishes for a great session.
Right. Hi, everybody. It's Hillary Marshall here. I'm just gonna get queued up here. Hey, everybody. It's good to be at another Toronto Region Board of Trade Transportation Summit. I know I have developed a lot of gray hair since that first summit 7 years ago. Congrats to Jan and the team and great sponsors like SNC and everyone else involved today in making it possible. I know we're all excited to do this. I'm here on behalf of the Canada Infrastructure Bank, where we're now involved in investment structuring for more than 35 different infrastructure projects across 5 different sectors, including sustainable transportation initiatives. We have transit initiatives like zero emission buses, LRTs, and more. I'm going to introduce our fabulous panel. Exciting. We got to get our energy up for our final panel today. And so this group is going to be talking about vital areas of our infrastructure future, sustainable transportation. Our first panelist is Ilana Altman, co-director of the Bentway. If you have skated underneath the Gardiner Expressway, then you know all about the Bentway. It first opened in 2018, and since then it's quickly grown into a beloved local attraction, proving that land beneath the Gardiner and elevated highways can be revitalized and repurposed for city building. I'm really excited to hear Ilana's perspective on today's conversation. Next on our panel is Olivier Marcel, Vice President of Public Affairs at Alstom Canada. Alstom acquired Bombardier Transportation in 2020, making it Toronto's provider for Flexity streetcars as well as LRT vehicles, Toronto's current subway cars, and GO Transit train cars. In June this year, Alstom signed a contract to supply 60 new Flexity streetcars to Toronto, which will be added to the more than 200 streetcars that have already been provided. I'm looking forward to that. We also have Dr. Ali Ahmadi, Professor of Engineering and Canada Excellence Research Chair Laureate at McMaster University, as well as the Canada Research Chair in Transportation, Electrification, and Smart Mobility. If you ever wanted to talk to somebody about whether or not we're going to get Judy jets and flying cars, Dr. Ahmadi is your guy. Finally, I want to welcome Shailin Bhatt, the Senior Vice President of Global Transportation Innovation at the multinational engineering firm AECOM. He's also the former Executive Director for the Colorado Department of Transportation and Cabinet Secretary for the Delaware Department of Transportation. AECOM has long been engaged in the Toronto region transportation scene and is currently providing architecture and engineering design work for the city's new Ontario line. Shailin posted on LinkedIn about today's panel, and I swear to God, I've never seen so many people respond to a post. Very popular panelist. So let's make sure, as I mentioned, everybody's energetic and ready to go for this panel, and we're going to start off with a question to Ilana. Ilana, this session is all about rethinking the future of transportation and what it could look like. How can we use new and old transportation infrastructure for city building and provide civic spaces that people value? What do you think?
Well, thank you for the introduction, Hillary, and a big thanks to the Toronto Region Board of Trade for inviting me to join today's discussion. I think I'll start just by echoing something that we've heard throughout the day, which is a recognition that for too long we built our streets and highways in a single purpose way. I mean, as soon as cars were introduced, street design bent to their knees and have remained largely their sole domain, at least in North America, for the better part of the last century. But as cities densify, and especially I think after what we've seen throughout COVID, there's a recognition that there's a real necessity and an urgency to move beyond this way of planning and to reconsider the role of the street and large-scale infrastructure projects to see how they can help to serve a broader range of urgent needs. And I think there's equally a recognition that these networks can address an interrelated set of issues and support environmental and socially resilient spaces that serve the broader public good. projects like the Bentway, and many thanks for referencing our skating trail, which is up and running, which I encourage everybody to come by and to experience themselves. But projects like the Bentway are challenging the status quo, and they're asking our infrastructure to do more, and they're demonstrating how contemporary needs and values can be embedded into older infrastructure and to resituate it in the context of the city. Our public space underneath the Gardiner is a thriving programming platform. It's a kilometer long in length in its first phase. It supports new landscapes and multi-use trails and amenities such as the skating loop and the amphitheater. And over the course of the pandemic, it has really served as a very essential public space to support people's mental health and recreational needs in this time of strain. But beyond the Bentway, I think COVID has demonstrated that our streets are vital places. We've seen cultural activity and commercial activity move outdoor. We've seen our streets become places for protest and to sustain civic life. And in many cases, those uses coexisted with mobility functions. I think for me, what's particularly exciting, the Bentway, draws from projects like the High Line in New York and the Atlanta Beltline and the Detroit Riverfront. But what differentiates, I think, our space and our opportunity within the Toronto context is that we haven't necessarily waited for infrastructure to come to the end of its natural life before we decided to reinvest. We recognized that there was an ability to think in a hybridized way. There was an ability to have an active highway maintain its mobility function while we invested in these new types of public spaces below. And I think that can equally be done at street level as well. It's not an easy context to do this. It's a piece of mid-century infrastructure. We exist in a freeze-thaw climate. There's many different challenges. So if it can be done here, I think it really can be done anywhere. But I think on the whole, what today really emphasizes is that both our transportation network and our public realm are our city's competitive advantage. And we need to strive for greatness here. And we need to ask our infrastructure to be productive in new ways, to serve multiple needs, to serve multiple publics and at multiple scales.
I love that you think that way, Alana. I think that infrastructure has a power to create inclusivity and to enhance the lives of those who live and work around it. And so if you're like me and you'd like to hear what piece of infrastructure in the region Alana most dreams about activating, put it into the chat, into the Q&A. We really welcome your questions for our panelists. This is a big thinking blue sky panel. They want your big questions about what is possible and what the future looks like. So make sure you get your questions in. We're going to turn to Michael. Alstom is one of the biggest suppliers of, or Olivier, I should say, Alstom is one of the biggest suppliers of rail equipment. When we think about the future, what does that look like for rail and how does it connect cities differently?
Yeah, Hilary, thank you very much for the invite. Also, thank you to the Toronto Region Board of Trade. I must say that I won't surprise anybody with my answer, but from our perspective in terms of rail, the future is green and the future is smart. So if we are looking at how the big trends in the 21st century, like we're facing many challenges. You can think about urbanization, you can think about the increased need for mobility of goods and person. You think about fighting climate changes. Just like a few months ago, we had the COP26 and, all the countries and the leaders in the world were there, like discussing how they're going to give life to the Paris Agreement and, discussing diesel ban measures, carbon taxes, and so on. So we believe that the objective of the entire mobility sector, actually, it's to move to carbon neutrality. And how are we going to do this? I mean, from a pure rail perspective, you have to work on different pillars. And obviously, the first thing is the leadership of governments and the states. You think about the investment. If you look around, like governments are making huge investment currently in terms of system, transit, infrastructure. The federal government, just invested $1.2 trillion, and half of it was going to be complete new funding out of it. Just here in Canada, massive investment as well in all provinces to enhance transit, to enhance transportation. In Ontario, we're talking about billion and billion of dollars invested in the Greater Toronto Area, just about the subway program. There's a very important expansion of the GO rail transit network. So that's really, really impressive. So I think that that portion is quite good. And in doing those investments, we need to start turning ourselves to the new technologies, to the new way of doing things. So when you think about inner cities and probably suburbs around the city, you must think about electrification. And if you see what's going on in Montreal or in Toronto, governments have made multi-billion investment. In Montreal, we call it le REM. You know, we're talking about doubling the number of tracks dedicated to passenger travel. And it's going to be 100% electrified. This is going to be a game changer for the city. In Toronto, I've talked about the GO extension again, but like a lot of it will be toward electrification. So we believe that that's the way to go, especially if your energy is coming from green sources. But Canada specifically, and I would say it's the case in North America. If you look at the rail network in Canada, we have 64,000 kilometers of rails. It's almost 100% non-electrified as we speak. So we don't think that we will have the means to electrify all those networks, those rails, especially in regions where we have low density. So we will have to think about alternative. An alternative could be battery, but battery takes a lot of power, and we're not there yet, you know, for long distance and for power. So you can think about hydrogen. And Alstom has been leading the way in terms of hydrogen propulsion. In Germany, we have a train, a hydrogen train called the Coradia Island, which has been in commercial service for the last 2 years. And now we've tested this train in many, many countries in Europe. And we have close to 60 copies now sold of that train. Now, this is a technology that's not there yet in North America. And we see that the industry is thinking strongly about it, especially in Canada. We know that the freight sector with CP and with CNs are moving toward this. We see this in the United States as well. So hydrogen will be probably a good solution, again, especially if we're talking about green hydrogen for the future. Another avenue that we must look about, it's high-speed. High-speed rail, when we have the economics and the corridor to do the economics, high-speed is a solution to change habits of people, moving them away of taking their car or taking the plane, choosing the cleanest mode of transportation that exists, which is rail. So that's also technology that we see all around the world. Many, many countries have adopted high-speed corridor and infrastructure to in a multimodal way to support other mode of transportation, but Canada has not yet. In the all the G7 countries, but Canada has that kind of technologies, but other countries such as Finland and obviously China and Israel and Morocco. So that's a kind of technology we believe we will adopt in the future. And I've talked, and I'm going to close on that. Yes, I'm talking about green, but we're talking about smart as well. And digitalization of transportation right now, it's something that it's really important. Why? Because you can take exactly the same infrastructure, the same train, and you can do massive gain if you move to automation, digitalization with new technology and so on. You can reduce the time between the train, the interval reduction. You can improve the reliability, the punctuality. When you have an automatic train, and that's the case in Montreal with the REM, for instance, you know, like you have smoother operation. Why? Because like it's not the human factor to decide when to brake, when to accelerate, and so on. So you're gaining in energy as well. And you add all in this the new features, always new features that that drives us today as individuals. Cybersecurity, which is really important. Connection, booking of your travel. So all those things are really, really important. And on the maintenance side, same thing, you know, predictive maintenance. We have scanners now in Europe. The train just get into a big scanner and they can see the states of all the components, if we have to change them, you know, like, and from a cost perspective, from an efficiencies perspective, it's really, really interesting. So those, I would say, the big pillars where the world is moving right now. And we see much more progress, I would say, in Europe and in Asia than in North America. North America, it's still today still a car land, I would say. So we think about bringing those kind of technology here in North America. We expect to play a leadership role in this, but all the industry is getting there as we speak.
Right on, Olivier. You talk a bit about smart mobility, smart transportation, and the advancement there. Let's get Ali in to talk about how his research has touched on this area and what is smart mobility and how does it interact with other issues that are frequently discussed in transit. And I'm thinking, you know, such as equity, diversity, and inclusion. That's, I think, you know, very topical today.
I would like to look at the reasons for smart mobility from three major angles. The first angle is actually sustainability and energy efficiency. If we want to have a more sustainable solution for transportation, we have no choice but to go electrified and smart. So if you look at different users of energy, there are three major sectors. Transportation is a big sector for energy usage. Residential is another one, and industrial, residential, commercial, and then industrial is another sector. So if you are in transportation, historically, your main source of energy has been from fossil fuels. But if you're in residential, commercial, or industrial sector, you can get your energy from electric power grid as well. So the future of transportation is electrified, and the future vehicles are more and more electric. So they are connected. They are going to be more and more connected to the future of infrastructure and the future of electrical grid, which is going to be a smart grid. So a smart transportation, a smart mobility will be integrated with a smart grid, and it's an integrated, connected, autonomous, capable, highly intelligent system. That's one angle we need to bring a smartness into the picture. The second major reason is for planning purposes. So if you are doing planning at different levels, macro transit, city level, regional or provincial, if you bring a smartness and intelligence to your planning, you can do data-driven decision-making. You can do planning to do more with limited resources or with less resources. Everywhere we have limited resources, and we need to plan them better and do it in a more intelligent way. The third massive reason for bringing a smartness into mobility is actually riders and customers. They are demanding and will demand that more. So today, riders expect the same level of customer experience as they get from other technology experiences they have. And we need to make rider experience a bigger priority. And in order to do that, we need to be to have a smart and intelligent systems. And we need to look at it not just from a business and planning point of view, but we need to have EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion as our lens when we look at such systems. For example, people want to go contactless fare payments, right? A lot of us do not want to touch stuff, because of COVID-19. So if you are going to go contactless and we want to reduce physical touch points, we need to consider EDI. We need to think about some people might not have smartphones. Some people might not have credit cards. So having different and evolving fare payments from more conventional point of view toward more flexible, next generation, touchless, with a lot of different options is really important. And then when you have massive amounts of data, such as what we have in transit systems, then you have no choice but to use artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning, ML. Now, what's the problem with AI and ML? Because without AI, you cannot do as much because we are talking about massive, massive amounts of data. Now, the problem is, if you look at the use of AI and machine learning in some of our social media companies and algorithms they use, a lot of them are driven by how many clicks they can generate, how much money they can generate. And I would argue that would that is a source of some of our problems in the society. So what I would say, when you are bringing EDI, when you bring EDI to AI and machine learning, you can do a lot more. I would argue if you are going to look at artificial intelligence for transportation systems, start with a truly diverse team. It's not as effective if you have a bunch of people looking like me and doing the design. You need to have a diverse...
You look pretty good, Ali. You look pretty good.
Thank you. A diverse group of people, engineers, scientists, computer programmers, and that's what we are actually doing in our research group at McMaster Automotive Resource Center at McMaster University in partnership with Cubic Transportation Systems that we are partnering with them, and we made the announcement 2 days ago, but we start with a truly diverse team. And right that team at the university is independent. It's not about how much money they would generate, because we have a bigger goal in mind, and we put EDI front and center. And I would argue we need to do that for the next generation of transportation.
Well, Shaylin, we got to get Shaylin in here, because some of the things you talked about, big data, touchless technology. Shaylin, you're looking globally at what the latest is. And so what new technologies are going to be reshaping transportation, our industry, in the coming decades? I think everybody wants to hear what's going on globally and how we can bring it home, because you're a hometown boy, right?
Yeah. So, it's funny. It's a real honor to be part of this group. And I think when you want to look at the future, I think it's important to also look back at where we've been. And long before I was like a minister level of transportation in a couple of U.S. states, I was a program manager for the Black Creek Regional Transportation Management Association. And my job was to try to get people out of single occupant vehicle trips and to take transit and to ride share and to do different things. And I remember a few people were like, this is a great idea. Get everybody else out of their car so I can drive with no traffic. And I was like, that's not what we're talking about here. But if you think about Toronto in that early 2000s period, which was when I was starting my career in transportation, it's a very different place. And so if we're trying to project 10, 15, 20 years, 50 years in the future, think back where we were in the early 2000s, right? So we weren't talking about massive investments in rail. The Eglinton extension, I think they called it, was kind of dead in the water, right? I didn't have one, but a lot of my friends were getting BlackBerries. That was 2G technology. If you go get a smartphone today, it's 5G. 10 years after I was doing this job, we did the world's first commercial autonomous vehicle trip in Colorado for a truck that went 100 miles on the interstate with no driver in there. So the pace of change is pretty amazing. So and I think the biggest thing is like Toronto has kind of risen up to that. I think Toronto's always been considered a great city, but if you're going to be a great city, you need to have transportation options. You couldn't get from downtown to the airport by train back at that time. One of the coolest things that I thought was that I got to do was speak at a conference in Toronto 2 or 3 years ago and take a train right into Union Station from the airport. Like that's a hallmark of a great city. So I think there's basic infrastructure investments that are being made right now. So, you know, for people who want to take transit as an option, I think that's really, before you had limited choice, now with all of the investment that's going on, as Olivier mentioned, I think there's really going to be options. One of the challenges I think that Toronto has in terms of density, right? So it's one of the biggest cities in terms of land covered over, and transit works best when you have density, right? And so that's why the new technologies, micromobility, that first and last mile connection is so critical. And so I would say, as you sort of cast your view into the future, there's going to be this increase in micromobility options. So whether that's e-bikes or scooters, so that people can make that first mile, last mile connection to those big trunk lines. I think eVTOL is, I think that's a new technology that's being developed now that I think people talk about the Jetsons and flying around. And I think it's a lot closer than, I landed in Dubai a couple of years ago and my ride sharing app pulled up, would you like, Uber regular, Uber XL, Uber Black, or Uber Air? And I thought I should just do it for $10,000 or whatever it was, just to check the box. Then sanity took hold of me. But I think eVTOL, and this is a space, and again, you begin to see this convergence, right? So, it's these multiple modes of transportation, multiple technology. And I think the other thing, and Ilana had talked about this before about infrastructure. For a long time, we've been talking about how do we build infrastructure so we can move more cars and trucks, right? So it's always about the 401 and what do we do with the Gardiner and all these are options. I think as great cities that you think about, they're talking now about moving people, data, and freight, right? So on the data front, we're not using 2G BlackBerries anymore. It's 5G. It's real time. Traffic congestion is a big issue in the GTA. So pollution is an issue. If you get electrification, you really reduce emissions, and now that's less of a problem. And using 5G technology, if you take that dead time in the car while you're having to sit around and drive around, but now you transform it into an autonomous vehicle, level 4, level 5, where it's driving yourself, and you transform that dead time into productive time. Now, if my commute takes me an hour, is that really a terrible thing? Or is it just kind of like the pandemic has reshaped how we view our homes? Now the car is no longer a driving vehicle, but it's a mobile office. And so the last point I'll just share is, a couple of years ago I was in Copenhagen, and Copenhagen, they actually have bicycle congestion, right? And everybody's like, well, they're Euros. Of course they bike. It's fine. What else are they going to do? But they didn't. Back in the 1950s and 60s, there's pictures of all these what are now parks being parking lots in Copenhagen, and they made a concerted effort. And now like 60 or 65% of trips in Copenhagen are on bicycle. And so I think what's really important is Toronto has to decide, how do we build on all of this infrastructure investments that we made, and what is that future vision? And then you deploy technology as tools to achieve that vision, as opposed to technology for the sake of tech.
Right on, Shaylin. So panelists, Shaylin touched on the, some of the key factors that might drive this movement towards sustainable transportation. And so if you had to give me one or two things that you think would drive this, this progress in this region towards sustainable transportation, what do you think it would be? What would some of those trends or factors be? Just give me a wave of your hand if you want to take this one on, or I'm going to nominate you. Olivier is smiling. Olivier, what do you think?
No, I think we're doing, as Shaylin just said, I think we're doing good thing now, especially in Canada. We're serious. We're serious about it. We want to change habit, but we need to accelerate. And I would say that there's a couple of things that we should do better. But one of the things that in Canada we should do better is the partnership between I would say the authority leadership, the government leadership, and the industry to be new adopters of technology and to move forward in a direction. I think that it's good to do. I was talking earlier about hydrogen, right? So every government last year, I think there was 13 governments around the world that published a hydrogen strategy. And we know that this year it's going to be like 22 or 23 other government that's going to publish a strategy about hydrogen, right? Like everybody's embarking on this, moving on this, and making plans. That's fine, making plans. We need action. And we need the government to start partnering with experts and the industry and academia to say, okay, this is where we want to go, and we're going to work together to push this in that direction in a certain period of time, making the investment private and public, but moving it. And not, like making just sketching out the diagnostic of the problem and then expected that the industry is going to take over and move it in the right direction. And what I find very, very encouraging now is that you see that social movement and the population pushing in that direction, like asking that action. And I'm pretty sure that specifically in the ecosystem of Montreal and Toronto, that's one of the reasons why we're seeing right now those massive investments. So I would say partnership, better cooperation, better dialogue between the public and private would be the way to go.
Right. And I see Ali wants to hop in here, but so, it's all about partnership, regulatory exploration, policy exploration. Ali, what do you think? Is it going to be about technology?
Yeah, so I think the decision makers, they need to think about, a better world, a brighter world, more than, just traditional aspects. For example, fair payments and fair payment technologies provide a lot more than revenue to agencies. They provide valuable data. So if this is a lot of data, can we use the data with artificial intelligence, machine learning to nudge people toward more sustainable ways of transportation? So, and making more sustainable ways of transportation cooler to people. So if you look at people when they drive cars, a typical internal combustion engine average efficiency on average from tank to wheels is less than 20%. Now, imagine you have a big SUV and your weight and the SUV's weight is 4,000 pounds and you are like 200 pounds, like me. So if you go from point A to point B, 95% of energy is used to move the car, 5% is to move you. And then the overall efficiency is 20%. That means the efficiency of a single occupancy driver going from point A to point B could be literally 1% or less. Now, how do we address this? Of course, we need to go with electrified cars, but if your car is still heavy, yes, the efficiency instead of 20% of the car is 80, 90%. But if the car uses 95% of energy to move itself and 5% you, what's the solution? The solution is, move more and more travelers toward more sustainable ways like transit. Now, you cannot force people to do that, but can you nudge people to do that? And to advance fair payments and all kinds of incentives with the EDI lens on. And in that process, I would say we need to bring is an integrated approach. Electric bicycles, conventional bicycles, electric scooters, light electric vehicles, last mile delivery vehicles, all of them are part of the system. And you need to have such a massive system in a smart way.
Right on. We heard Shaylin talk about some of those last mile solutions that can be better enabled by technology adoption. Shaylin, is there any magic wand that you would wave to get sustainable transportation moving faster?
Yeah, I remember we always tell people to do things, right? Like wear your seatbelt, don't drink and drive, take transit, and people don't want to be told to do things, but I think they can be incentivized to do things. And I think there is more of an awareness, a social consciousness around the environment. I think the floods in BC really drove home this idea that climate change, just like flying cars, isn't 20 years away, or drone delivery of passenger flight. Climate change is not 20 years away. It's here now, and people want to make changes about it. And I do think, though, that as we contemplate technology, I think there's a famous saying, something like, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure rhymes sometimes. Last year there was a big ice storm in Texas, and power was out for a few days, and people were, it took what was a pretty advanced civilization and took us back, pretty quickly. There's a lot of sub chatter, though, about what if we had a bunch of electric cars out there, and because people were using their vehicles for mobile heat to be able to get around. I can remember the big blackout in the early 2000s in the whole eastern seaboard of the U.S. and Canada. What do these big events? I remember SARS, right? SARS in 2003, and presaging the pandemic, 9/11. There are these big events that occur that have an ability to sort of like recast us in a different direction. And so I think that we were making great strides in sustainability and people using transit. Well, the pandemic has reshaped that. Now, is there some reluctance now to get on transit? So it's going to take even more incentive now to get people to overcome these things. And so I think incentivizing people instead of beating them over the head with just do it because it's the right thing to do. Some people respond to that, but I think it's up to government and the private sector to find ways to reward that good behavior.
So truly, understanding human behavior and moving people to adopt based on want versus being told, right? So
yeah, I think everybody is now ordering things off of Amazon because it's easy, right? Mm-hmm. So Ali talked about electric bikes. For a lot of us, there's like sort of like the spandex warriors, and then the rest of us. I might want to ride downhill to a station, but getting back uphill, I don't know if I'm going to do that, right? But if I've got an e-bike, I might make that choice, right? Or if I can take rideshare instead of having to work all these things. So I think there's way more choice now. And I think that the market is showing us where people want to be, how they want to get around. I think we just need to do a better job of listening to that and tuning into that.
Right on. I want to make sure we get Alana back in this conversation. Alana, question from the audience. They want to know, as we build up the use of the areas underneath our key infrastructure, like the Gardiner, for public space, how does that coexist with the desire to reduce car traffic and remove things like the Gardiner Expressway at some point for other uses? What, you must get asked this a million times, like, does the Gardiner come down? Like, what happens to an organization like yours, our fabulous skating lanes?
Yeah, I mean, I think to build off what Shaylin was saying, it's easy to forget what Toronto looked like, and especially Toronto's waterfront looked like 20, 30 years ago. And, I think much like a lot of cities where you've had these infrastructural barriers, the city builds up around it. And regardless of whether the infrastructure remains, the splice or the we used to call it a scar in the urban fabric is still there. And I think that regardless of whether the highway remains active above, this desire for more connectivity between very dense neighborhoods that are emerging up all around the waterfront is going to be essential. When we first built the Bentway back in 2018, we estimated that there was about 100,000 people who lived within a 10-minute walk between Liberty Village and City Place and a number of the other neighborhoods in the area. That's only grown. Like I think in the 4 years that we've been operational, that's now 120,000 plus, just based on the amount of development. And a lot of these neighborhoods, you feel the division between them that's created by the Gardiner, that's created by major roadways, and there hasn't been enough thought about how we bridge those gaps and we create a more interconnected series of residential and commercial neighborhoods. So I think that increasingly we're moving away from a concept of public space that's very destination based, and we're thinking about it as a connective tissue. And to my point about the waterfront changing, Waterfront Toronto, they have been talking about leading with landscape right from the beginning. And you can see the way that that has remapped the city, that now I think that there is a far less of a distinction between landscape and infrastructure than there ever was before, and all for the better. You can navigate the downtown core through a series of interconnected parks, and I think we're actively looking at where those gaps exist to ensure that that network is complete and extensive, and allows us to better circulate and allows us for better active transportation options. And if anybody spent any time down at the waterfront and along Queens Quay during the pandemic, it's success. I mean, it's in some ways a victim of its own success in that it was so densely populated. There were so many people who were in need of those corridors to be able to navigate through. I think that increasingly we just need to be able to find those connective opportunities to allow the city to thrive.
Right on. We've got another question from the audience here. I'm going to throw it open. I think we've touched on some of this, but let's get to it. One big emissions reduction solution and goal ahead of us is to reduce single occupant vehicle and short distance automobile trips. So there are many ways to do this, as this question suggests: reducing parking minimums, transit service, micromobility, which you touched on. What's the panel see as the most effective solutions to get this implemented faster? Anyone want to try this? Yeah,
so I would say, building off what Alana talked about, when I think about great cities in the world, they're the ones that are, again, getting away from this, how do we move more cars and trucks, and how do we move more people, right? And turn these spaces back into public spaces. So you look what New York City's done with Broadway, right? Like, made it less of a car thoroughfare and set up like restaurant areas. You look at London, Barcelona, taking large sections and saying no more cars in this area. And so I think part of it is finding those parts of the city where, you do want to restore, but there are also many Torontos, right? So there's that downtown core with a lot of density, but there's Etobicoke, there's Mississauga, there's this whole region that is car dependent. And so to me, and this makes it easy for me because I'm not politically connected in any way here, but I think people change behavior when you price something, right? So you want to reduce carbon, you price carbon appropriately. There's a lot more gasoline usage in the US because it's cheaper, right? And taxes are higher on gas in Canada, and I think that's good social policy. If you look at what's going on with congestion pricing around the world, this is in Singapore, it's in London, it's coming to Los Angeles and New York City. I think taking an honest approach of what are the true costs of that trip. And right now it's being borne disproportionately. And we got to figure out what the cost of that trip is and then price it. And that's the only way you're going to get people to get out of their single occupant vehicle trip and incentivize them to move elsewhere. But politically, that's always a tough one.
Oh, we're all familiar with tough political nuts to crack, I'm sure. Hey, Ali, did you want to hop in on this one? And then I've got a question for Olivier. Oh, and then, you know what, we've got to wrap up. So, Ali, what do you think?
Very quickly, I would push for advanced technologies and bring up technologies that could eliminate the need for using cars. For example, if we talk about eVTOL and flying cars or drones, in order to deliver packages, you do not need to have a commercial truck going around the city. Can you develop them with a smart drones, highly efficient, electric to do those things? And there are a bunch of applications like this. I would offer more flexibility, more technologies to the users, and I would go with the software and integration of connecting all of these systems together is extremely important. That as a traveler, I can use the transit system connected to my car or autonomous capable car, and also drone activities.
Right on. We had so many more interesting questions, including one on hydrogen and partnerships. I want to make sure that everybody knows that these panelists are, I'm sure we can make sure that your questions get answered and they'll be accessible to you. So on behalf of all of us at the Toronto Region Board of Trade and our sponsors, we want to thank this incredible group of panelists. Alana, Olivier, Ali, Shaylin, you brought incredible insights and you took some good, tough questions from the audience, including trying to crack some tough political nuts. Good for you, Shaylin. You're going to have to leave the city soon. Before we wrap up this session, I just want to invite Dr. Ahmed El-Janadi to speak on the future of transportation. Dr. El-Janadi is professor at McGill School of Urban Planning and is particularly interested in the use of advanced information technology in the future of public transportation systems. Welcome, Ahmed. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks. It's an honor to be here, and it's exciting to talk to all of you after this exciting panel and all the great ideas. Next slide, please. But let me go back to the past a little bit to understand why we are here today. And we are here today because we had the streetcars, and then we got the automobile, and we placed the automobile on front as the priority for us. And rather than, as Shaylin said, we were really concentrating on the cars and try to solve our problems by bringing this guy to stand in the middle of the street, and it didn't really work well. So we thought of new ideas, and our first new idea was, next slide please, was to build new freeways, and kept building more and more freeways. And of course, the output was what we see today in the next slide, which is we see clearly that congestion is here. The next slide, yeah. So that we see that the congestion is here and it's here to stay. And we have to deal with that, and we have to work with it and work around it. Some of us have their own ideas, similar to what we'll see in the next slide, that we see some ideas that people really want to has been waiting for this thing to come. It didn't come, but the future, when we talk about the future in the next slide, we see that we have cars. If we make them electric, they're still stuck in traffic. If they're autonomous, stuck in traffic. If they're autonomous and sharing, they will be stuck in traffic. The whole idea is that the future we should be thinking about other things, not just cars. So if we look in the next slide, we'll see that COVID had showed us that when we removed the cars after the pandemic, we went up totally high in congestion and the number of requests to the Apple API asking them to drive. But the good thing is that we started seeing some increase in walking that wasn't there before. So we see a very high percentage of increase in walking, and that's promising in many areas in Toronto that we saw. So in the next slide, we see that we need to start thinking about the large investments we are making in the public transport system. So in Montreal, we're building the REM, but it's accompanied by an intensive densification in the district, as you see here, and thinking of that the REM is not going to be alone. It has to be high density around it, so we can take advantage of the capital investments that we're putting on and take advantage of it. So that's very important. And then in the next slide, we can see that we need to make sure that it's activity, like make good connections for all modes. The best transport plan is a land use plan. We need to make sure that when we invest in the transport, we think about the land use. We don't just discard the land use and not think about it, how we're going to be integrated, just get it the new rail to the middle of nowhere. No, we need to, as the left, we saw how we should be integrating things. Because in the next slide, we can see that we want to make sure that when we take a random picture on the streets, will be similar to this random picture that I have taken in Delft a couple of years ago when we were allowed to travel. That the quality of life and the happiness of the individuals, and it's not just one mode, it's a collection of modes that we have to start thinking about, and we want to make sure that it's always integrated with the land use, and the land use serves us. So we are moving people, as Shaylin said, and concentrate on the well-being of people, as Ilana said, and also make smart investments, as Ali and Olivier talked about today. So thank you so much, and next slide for this.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Ahmed, for your insightful presentation. That was fantastic. And thank you to our panelists and Hillary, our moderator, for sharing your thoughts on the future of transportation in the region. Some of what I heard in terms of the future of transportation, I think includes the ability and power to create inclusivity as into our infrastructure builds, that the future is green but requires leadership from government with business. The future also includes better use of big data and employing AI that respects equity, diversity, and inclusivity to nudge people to make more sustainable decisions and choices. And I think that really resonates with me in terms of how to use data better to incent people to more sustainable transportation choices. Also increasing the mobility options and thinking about public space as our city's connective tissue. And then I think finally from Ahmed, it was really about connection of modes as well as part of the future of transportation. So thank you all for that. And before I close out the panel and introduce our final keynote speaker, the Honorable Mayor Bonnie Crombie, I want to look at the results from our poll. If you recall, our poll was around future of board events, which rank transportation topics that you'd be most interested in taking a deeper dive into. And it looks like public transit delivery was number one, followed by a close tie between climate goals in relation to transportation and technology, automation, and innovation. So many things that we heard from our panel. So thank you all for taking that poll. And this kind of feedback that's really always good for us at the board to consider, because it really helps guide our research, guide our advocacy, communications work, and lets us know the areas in the region we really want to invest in.